Hello everyone, welcome back to another video and happy new year. We continue to have the threat for a cold and wintry spell of weather across the UK and Ireland in the first week and a bit of 2025, and actually the chance for significant snowfall has increased. And in this video we are going to look in detail at all the locations currently at the highest risk for snowfall, as well as some of the reasons behind that risk. However, I thought I'd start off by looking at the current situation, and that's because we already have a risk of snow across central and southern Scotland. This is the band of precipitation I've been talking about for the last couple of days, and this is the backside of that low pressure system. So we're actually starting to get colder filtering down in from the north, and as you can see, the pink and green colours indicate wintry precipitation, both wet snow, sleet and snow in pink. So areas kind of very low elevation and close to the coast are probably seeing more of a rainy or wintry mix, but areas at higher elevation and inland, and especially where the precipitation is heavy, so kind of these regions sort of here, yellow and orange, are actually likely to see snowfall, and it's possible some areas could see an accumulation of maybe a dusting to a couple of centimetres or so as this band moves to the south. And if you look to the north of that, you can just really see those classic showers as a result of the instability between the cold upper air temperatures and the relatively warm sea temperatures, probably kind of 9-10 degrees. The upper air's maybe 15 degrees colder than that, so you get instability developing. There are showers, a classic sign of the cold air mass pushing in. But if you look to the south, we still have quite mild and unsettled weather in place. A nice cold front here, that's indicated by the band of line convection, which essentially is the very thin but quite high reflectivity radar returns, essentially high rain rate, as you can see there. That's in the red and orange, so definitely some torrential rain with this as it moves to the east and southeast. But if we run through the loop, actually, you can see a slightly interesting motion there. It's generally moving to the east, but has a slight northerly component up here as well. But like I said, torrential rain in this band, and also some pretty gusty winds. Already been 40 to 50 mile an hour wind gusts inland, higher along the coast, but especially along this band, and especially this section here, so generally moving kind of in this direction. Actually, let's check on the radar. So that segment moving in that direction, potentially seeing even stronger winds, maybe around 60 miles an hour. But that's going to clear all of eastern and southeastern England by around 3 or 4 o'clock. Behind that, though, we do have heavy rainfall pushing into southwest England and South Wales, so the risk of some flooding there for sure. But as that low pressure system, which is currently seen on the radar but is roughly around here, clears to the east, all of the UK is going to begin to get into that cold air, and you can see that quite nicely here on the GFS chart. This is just going to give us a quick overview of the weather pattern for the next couple of days before things turn more interesting on the weekend. But there you can see our snow showers pushing in. That's our cold front. So obviously this is a chart for today, and there's our low pressure system with cold northerly winds on the western side. And by tomorrow, by Thursday, we also have our high pressure just to the west as well. And if we take a look at the air mass chart, this is showing the temperature about 1.5 kilometers above the ground. You can see our -5 line is now covering all of Ireland and most of the UK, bar the very, very far south. So it will definitely be feeling quite chilly. Look, there it does eventually cover all of the UK by Thursday evening. So it will be feeling very, very cold on Thursday, especially where you've got a northerly wind, so places in Scotland will be feeling properly cold. And that cold air is going to remain in place until roughly the weekend, as you can see there. What will start to happen is our high pressure will start to drift towards the south and to the east and form a ridge across parts of the south of basically England and Ireland. Before that does happen, though, we are looking at a fairly confident risk of snow in the form of snow showers across northern and maybe some eastern coasts. Now, I always talk about the risk of snow showers whenever we have a northerly, and it's the same in this case. You can really see them piling in here on the UKV, especially across northern Scotland, but also to an extent parts of Northern Ireland and northern coast of Ireland, and then a very small risk across parts of eastern England, but not significant enough for actually settling snow there. You can see that threat quite nicely if I play through, so potentially a dusting to even some decent accumulations, more so for Scotland. Then on Thursday evening into Friday morning, we're potentially seeing a more organised band of snow, and we can take a look at this on the GFS model. Actually, let's use something a bit more high resolution. So this is the icon, and you can somewhat subtle, but this is the chart for Thursday evening. Very cold air across the UK, but take a look at the slight tightening of those isobars here Thursday evening. This is a small trough which is going to have some enhanced vertical motion and enhanced instability, and so as a result we're probably going to get organised snow showers, and like I said, maybe even a band of snow pushing south. The models don't pick up on that too well, and you can see the icon has it disintegrating quite quickly as it moves south. But historically, models have underestimated this threat. So I'd say, roughly for now, a large part of kind of northern England and Scotland is probably at risk for some snow accumulation and falling snow overnight Thursday into Friday, and you can see that sort of developing there. So potentially a dusting of snow, and those snow showers continue across the north until about Saturday, when, like I said, the pattern begins to change. And let's go back to the GFS here, and let's take a broader view. So currently, the reason for this cold weather is this North Atlantic high pressure right there, dragging down the cold air from the north. We also have troughing across parts of Scandinavia. That's going to change, however. That pressure is going to drift to the south and to the east and become a ridge across the southern UK on Friday. At the same time, we're going to start to see a much stronger Greenland high starting to set up to the north, and this is going to become a more substantial force of blocking, providing a more interesting risk of cold weather. And especially now that that Atlantic high has begun to weaken, we are starting to get the influence of this low pressure pushing in from the south. And as you can imagine, low pressure with bands of precipitation plus cold air, what's going to happen is that's going to fall as snow. And you can see this happening on the GFS here, a fairly significant snow event for a large part of the UK and Ireland, a lot of areas seeing falling snow, and even quite a large area seeing settling snow to a large degree. However, as is kind of typical in the weather, it is never that simple, and uncertainty with this low pressure system remains very high. Now, if you're going to take a look at something called a Dalmatian plot, I think I showed this yesterday. Essentially, it's taking the ensemble of the model, so all the different members, which essentially what those are doing are showing different possible scenarios of the weather forecast, and then it's plotting them onto a map which with each of the different dots showing a different possible location of the low pressure system, and the colours representing different possible intensities. So it's a fairly good tool to look at how uncertain the forecast is. Obviously, if the dots are all very close together and showing the same colour, like here, there's not really a lot of uncertainty, but when they're spread out, as is the case for Arlo, there is. And actually, we've got something quite interesting going on. It's quite a complex low pressure system, which I'll get into more very shortly, but I just thought I'd show you this first to basically visualize how much there is, kind of how large the margin of error is in the forecast. And you can see all of these different dots are showing a different possible solution, and it makes a huge difference to the forecast. For example, one of these deep northerly solutions would have blizzard conditions across basically northern England, Northern Ireland and Scotland. If you take one of these maybe further south solutions, you'd be looking at a significant dumping of snow across parts of southern England, the Midlands, maybe parts of Ireland as well, Wales too. And then also you have this secondary feature to the low, an extension of the troughing further south, and that has implications on the northerly low. For example, if this one's much stronger, this northerly low is likely to be weaker, and vice versa. So really there's a lot of uncertainty here, and that's why we're having quite a difficult time with the forecast. That being said, the models have started to converge towards a slightly more northerly solution. Some of the past models, I don't know if there's any, the GFS is old enough, the runs are old enough, I don't think so. Anyway, so some of the past models, the GFS in particular, and the UK Met Office as well, were showing a much more southerly track towards the low, and that was kind of going more down here, bands of precipitation across the far south. Whereas the ECM, the European model, was showing a much further north track, and it was kind of the battle between the two models. Now, a convergence has been made towards the European model, which I thought actually yesterday was slightly less likely, but right now it does seem to be the more likely scenario, and we can just run through a few different models and compare what's going on. So this is one possible scenario, the GFS showing falling snow across the southern England and the Midlands before slightly pivoting, kind of comes up like this and then sort of does a loop somewhat like that, as you can see there. So that's one possible scenario, which would leave a massive amount of snow across parts of the Midlands into northern England, because you're just having prolonged snowfall there, and actually even brings down snow into the south by the 7th. So that would be a fairly good scenario for most people in this region, because they'd see both falling and settling snow. However, of course, it's a completely stupid idea at essentially 5 or 6 days out to take one model run from one particular model as verbatim. The chance of this exact solution verifying is close to zero, not because we're not going to see snow, but just because the models can't get it perfect at this range. For kind of another different scenario, we can take a look at the European model. This time shows falling snow for large parts of Ireland and the Midlands, then starts to settle, especially into parts of Ireland and Northern Ireland, and then also Northern England and Scotland, but then that low ends up tracking much further to the north. So already large differences in the scenario for when compared to the GFS. The European model, you can see is much more similar to the this is the Canadian model, much more similar to the European model, except the snow is not as significant across Ireland. Anyway, you can kind of start to see the point, which is there's many different possible solutions, and we don't quite know which one is most likely at the minute. And we'll look into the reasoning for that a bit now. And if we take a look at the formation of this low across the Atlantic, let me go to the GFS and Europe and North Atlantic chart. So this low originates from the central Atlantic kind of Azores system, which we've been talking about for a while. This was actually initially expected to develop a significant New Year's Day storm with an injection of energy out to the north, which would kind of develop along a frontal zone and then push into the UK as a deep depression. That's not happened, and instead we just have a normal frontal zone. However, the models are actually suggesting that the formation of this low is going to be similar, and you can see that there. What happens is the kind of low pressure system ejects a rain band to the north. That's the rain band here, and via something called latent heat release, that then starts a cycle of self-development into a completely new low pressure system, as you see there, which then pushes north. The European model was even more keen on that idea, and if we kind of set in our minds the European model as being the most northerly, the most developmental, i.e. the low deepens the kind of largest amount of all the models, we can kind of compare the different scenarios. And in reference to what I just said, take a look at what the European model does. It really develops that rain band to the north, so much so that this rain band actually becomes the new centre for the low pressure system itself. And in kind of the weather world, in the northern hemisphere, a northerly track generally becomes stronger, and a stronger low takes a more northerly track. So it's kind of like a positive feedback loop in a way. And what happens here is that you develop that northerly track. The low pressure system forms a more northerly centre, takes a northerly track, and becomes stronger when compared to the GFS. So that's one of the big differences in the kind of model scenarios. But personally, when looking at this, I don't think it's particularly that likely, if I'm being completely honest. And this is because the type of low pressure formation that we're talking about here, kind of the type of term cyclogenesis, that means the kind of the formation and deepening of a low pressure system. This time it's a self-induced type of cyclogenesis, and I'm going to run through that now by looking at the jet stream charts. So this is the European model showing the winds very high up, 9,000 meters, so 9k into the air, basically where the jet stream is. This is our low pressure system, the kind of central Atlantic low that we've been talking about. I'm going to quickly change the colour of this pen. And if we track through kind of Thursday, Friday, you can see kind of what starts to happen, in that the jet stream is not particularly large, and it's not particularly present anywhere near this low. So that's what I mean by self-developing. We're not actually seeing a low pressure system already under the jet stream. In this case, the low pressure system is actually making its own jet stream in a way, and you can see that now. I talked about the latent heat release earlier, but essentially what this model is saying is we're going to get vertical motion on the north side of this low. That's going to develop a band of heavy precipitation. That's going to see pressure falls, and the latent heat release from the precipitation is going to induce its own segment of the jet stream, which is what the European model has here, its own jet stream segment. And from that point on, it's saying, well, now that existing segment is going to deepen the low which caused it in the first place. So it's kind of like a self-fulfilling loop. And what happens is that by Saturday, Sunday, the European model is saying we're going to have this big jet stream streak. It's going to be in the exit region, a lot of divergence at the upper levels, and so the pressure at the surface is going to fall, and we're going to see a deepening low pressure system, more northerly track, mild air across the south with a snow risk for areas further north. To be honest, I just don't think I can fully get behind that scenario, and I just think that especially when we talk about the New Year's Day low, which was a somewhat similar kind of thing, and that ended up becoming completely non-developmental. I don't see any reason why we can't rule out still the same thing happening to this low. And we can compare with the GFS. You can see here we do have an existing jet stream streak from that frontal zone and that deep low, but that's not actually what's kick-starting the development of this one. And like I said, it's the vertical motion of the rain band to the north, which then develops its own segment of the jet stream. And I mean, it's possible, so I'm not trying to rule out the European model, but I think in this kind of scenario, it's unlikely that it's going to massively deepen itself to the point the European model has. And I even slightly think there's a chance the GFS might be slightly overdoing it. I mean, by the point it gets to this sort of setup where you've got strong divergence to the northeast of the low, it is safe enough to say the low will be strong. I just am doubting a deepening to the extent the European model has it. And even with that deepening factored in, if we take a look at the pattern across Europe when that low is in place, let's look at the European model actually, you can see we don't have any high pressure across the continent. It's all low pressure. And historically, when you had this type of setup, those lows trend fairly significantly to the south. And if you combine maybe a slightly weaker low than forecast with a southward trend, I'm not going to rule out a more southern-based snow event. And it's hard to say that because the models right now are not showing that happening. I just don't think there's any point in ruling it out, to be honest. And some of the, I'd probably slightly lean towards some of these more southerly solutions being on the table at least. I'm not saying the European model is not going to happen. I'm just saying even though the model certainty has converged towards the European model, don't rule out the further south solutions. And similarly to the GFS, you can see there's not any substantial ridging across Europe itself, so I really wouldn't be surprised to see corrections further south. And the low on New Year's Day, I was thinking this is not going to trend south because there was a big high, a European high, centered like this. And in fact, the low itself didn't trend south. What happened is it was just weaker, and so because it's weaker, the pressure gradient force is not strong, so it doesn't travel further north. So that's a different mechanism of a trend further south. But in this case, if we see both, i.e. a slightly weaker low and a trend further south, basically repeating what I just said, but I wouldn't rule out a snow risk further south. And I think what the UKV model has is a fairly decent depiction of what I think at this stage is maybe slightly more likely. And I am going against kind of the grain of what the current models are saying, so hopefully not risking too much. But essentially, you can see what the UKV has. Now again, don't take this literally, this is just one possible solution, one possible scenario, but it's a band of snow across southern England into the Midlands, pushing north into the Midlands up towards northern England, and then down south again. On the way out we get another band of snow across the south, also some snow of course Southern Ireland. Now in terms of these snow depths, now don't take this chart super literally. This is basically applicable anywhere because we do know with this low pressure system it's quite large, it's quite elongated, and there's going to be multiple bands of rainfall turning to snowfall. And whenever that is the case, we're going to see a lot of accumulation, no matter if the low is up here, if it's here, or if it's further south. So I'm using UKV model because I find its snowfall depth to be quite accurate, and it's basically saying anywhere on the north side of the low could see 5 to 15 centimeters quite widely. So don't take this literally for Midlands and Southern England because, like I said, uncertainty is high. This is not necessarily going to verify, especially at this time range. But anywhere on the northern side of that low is likely to see 5 to 15 centimeters of snowfall, possibly more. And if you get the system doing a loop-to-loop, like the GFS has, maybe some areas will see as much as maybe 20 centimeters. However, I mean, it's still kind of 4 or 5 days away, plenty of time for things to change in the models, so don't take these scenarios too literally. Summarizing the threat of the low though, because kind of people have been asking about it quite a lot in the comments and stuff, but essentially we do know there will be a low pressure system likely pushing north up towards the UK and Ireland. We do know on the northern side of that we're going to be seeing significant snowfall, possibly 5 to 15 centimeters, maybe even more. What we don't know is exactly where that's going to happen. We also do know it's likely currently to be between Sunday and Monday, with a margin of error on either side of that. Now, currently the models are saying Ireland, Northern Ireland, Northern Midlands up towards Scotland and Northern England. So this kind of region here is at the highest risk. However, based on what I just said earlier, I would extend that risk to possibly be into parts of Midlands towards southern England, and then maybe into parts of southern Scotland. So this is a general region where I think keep an eye on the models, keep an eye on the forecast, because a lot can change in 4 or 5 days, and you never know what's going to happen. But we do know somewhere in the zone is going to see significant snowfall, as I said earlier. Now, following the clearance of that low pressure system, there are also quite a few questions about what's going to happen there. So the GFS is basically the cold lover's perfect scenario, because you get the Greenland high, which I was talking about, remains strong. You get a northerly and a northeasterly on the backside of that that low pressure, which would bring significant snowfall with smaller disturbances, snow showers across the east, and then also a continued risk of snow pushing up from the south, and that would be kind of 7th to the 10th onwards. That's one possible scenario. That's the best case if you like cold and snow. The European model, by contrast, from the get-go, the entire Greenland blocking is a lot weaker, which is part of the reason the low can slightly shift further north. I do think models can underestimate blocking, so another reason I'm not super keen on the European model at the moment. Now, the European model does actually leave us in a northerly flow, so following the kind of 6th, the 7th to the 8th would still be pretty chilly. This is not more of a northerly and a northwesterly rather than a northeasterly, so not quite as good for snowfall. And it does actually show a slight snow event on the 8th. Again, don't take this literally, but we end up getting a low pressure system pushing in from the Atlantic, which allows the return of mild southwesterlies by mid-month. So not really the greatest if you're a fan of cold and snow. The Canadian, by contrast, does have a slight return to mild, but actually keeps high pressure close. So it wouldn't be super snowy in this scenario, but it would be cold. But essentially what I've shown you there is 3 contrasting scenarios, i.e. the uncertainty is very, very high. And unfortunately, we're just not really quite going to know until the clearance of the low on between the kind of 5th to the 6th, maybe the 7th. So as much as I'd like to say what's going to happen now, we just can't, and it's really anyone's guess what happens towards the middle of the end, or as we approach the middle of the month. So it will still be cold, but in terms of snowfall and how long that cold risk lasts, we just don't know. So that's about it for now. Lots to talk about, and if you're a snow lover, potentially some pretty good stuff happening for you on the weekend. But anyway, that's about it for today. Thank you very much for watching, and have a great day. Bye-bye.